Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On the day before his crucifixion, Jesus sent Peter and John into the city of Jerusalem to get a large upper room where they might observe the Last Supper. John chapter 13 gives us that incredible story. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the Last Supper.
And let me read verse 1 to set the scene. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And J.R., this is John 13:1. I don't think any other verse in the Bible sets a scene quite like this one. This sets a magnificent scene.
Now, this term, before the feast of the Passover, does not mean that Jesus and his disciples observed the Last Supper on the day before everybody else did. What it simply means here is that Jesus foreknew what was going to happen. Every moment, every detail of the events for the next 24 to 48 to 72 hours, Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. And in spite of his knowing all of this, he still loved his disciples. You got to understand, let's set the scene. They were bickering among themselves who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. In spite of that, Jesus loved them. They didn't deserve his love at this point. Right? Here he faced his agony, he faced crucifixion, and they were arguing among themselves who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom.
Well, J.R., it seems at this point, in fact, it's very obvious that they still had the view of the Messiah as a political king. That is, to them the Messiah would come, he would overthrow the Roman Empire, he would overthrow the corrupt Pharisees, he would establish a new and perfect kingdom.
Yes.
And they thought of themselves as having primacy in the kingdom.
And a few days before, when those thousands of tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, who knows, up to 500,000 people maybe, who had those palm branches and waving and welcoming, it just excited those disciples. They thought, boy, the kingdom is imminent. Yes. And so they began to bicker among themselves. I'm going to be better. You're going to be under me. I'm going to be telling you what to do. James and John's mother had approached Jesus just a few days before, within the week. And she said, I want to secure 2 positions for my children. One to sit on your right hand, the other to sit on your left. Jesus had already told the disciples, you're going to sit on 12 thrones. And she said, I want one throne to be next to you on one side and the other throne to be next to you on the other side. And in spite of this, Jesus loved them. He knew that one of the disciples was going to betray him before the night was out. In spite of this, in spite of Judas' betrayal, he loved them. He knew that before the cock crowed in the morning and the sun came up, that Peter was going to deny him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And yet, he loved them. That's why John wrote verse 1, before the feast, when Jesus knew that his hour has come, he still loved his disciples. In fact, John writes, he loved them unto the end. Let's talk about this word love, Gary. It is agape.
Agape. And now this is the love of God. And, you know, in traditional Greek, by the way, in the ancient Greek of the philosophers, the term agape is very, very seldom used at all. Even though they had the word, they didn't use it because they felt that it was far beyond human capability to express this kind of love. The Greeks were that honest about this.
A divine love.
It is a divine love, and the Greeks thought, well, divinity is far, far above man. Man will never reach that level. But Jesus came, and he brought this agape, which is hard to define. The love of God is infinite. It is all-encompassing. I doubt that we can even comprehend it fully, except to say that it covers everything. As it's been said, love covers a multitude of sins. That's probably an understatement.
And I think it's the love that covers because the sin is there to be covered.
That's correct.
In fact, the Apostle Paul put it succinctly when he said, God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So this love, this divine love, is there because we're sinners. It is the foundational doctrine of this dispensation, Gary. It is called grace.
Grace. And J.R., how many books have been written on grace, and probably have never touched the fullness of the subject? But John 13, and we're going to get to the full details of it in this program and the next. John 13 shows love in action, agape love, as Jesus deals with people who don't understand what he's doing. In one case, the case of Judas, they don't care to understand what he's doing. They simply want him out of the way. There's a whole faction that thinks of Jesus as a very dangerous man. Why? Because he displays love, something very alien to the human condition.
Yes. Now, I've written an article for our July magazine on this chapter, and in it I have written, grace is the primary focus of the New Testament, in contrast to the law of the Old Testament. Eternal life is available to the entire human race as God's love gift. It is not something to be attained by human effort. We can only be saved from our sinful nature through our Savior's self-sacrifice. He allowed his crucifixion for the sole purpose of paying for our redemption. Therefore, eternal life can only be obtained by simply receiving his heavenly gift. We could never become worthy enough on our own to deserve a place in heaven's kingdom. So you can see these disciples bickering. I'm going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. You know, this, by the way, Luke was the only one who gives us this bickering. It's not in Matthew, not in Mark, not in John. Well, John alludes to it here because of the feet washing, but he doesn't come right out and say it. I can imagine Matthew, being an ex-tax collector, being right in on top of this conversation, who's going to be the greatest.
Well, if you were a tax collector like Matthew, that means you had favor with the Roman government.
Yes.
You had favor with the Pharisees.
Yes.
You knew a little something about politics, about how to appear well in public. And so why not? Matthew's perfectly suited to this,
Yes.
right?
I think Matthew just sort of, you know, swept this under the rug, wishing that it had never happened.
Probably.
Mark was too young. By the way, this Last Supper was in the home of the mother, Mary, the mother of John Mark. John Mark was a teenager at this time, so he was not really one of the apostles who wrote the Gospel of Mark. And Mark's Gospel is very abbreviated. It's only 16 chapters long. So I think that Mark, because he was not present to hear all of the bickering, didn't mention it, didn't feel qualified to mention it. And then, of course, John only alludes to it. Luke is the one who gives us the bickering, and Luke was not there. He was a student and disciple of the Apostle Paul, and would be well qualified to discuss this bickering, but he was not there, therefore he could do it objectively.
Now, as we've said many times, the Gospel of John is the Gospel that very carefully illuminates Christ's divinity, his deity, and the metaphysically perfect doctrines of the Messiah. John delves into the unspeakable, the unreachable. And J.R., now we get into, and we're just going to begin to open this first phrase in John 13, now before the feast of the Passover. That little phrase right there needs a lot of explanation.
Yes, and especially the first phrase of the second verse as well, the now supper being ended. This does not mean that the supper was over. But did you notice that John does not give us the details of the supper?
Yes.
He does not say, Jesus took a piece of bread and broke it and said, this is my body. That's in the other Gospels. John does not tell us that Jesus took a cup and passed it around saying, take, eat, this is my blood. That's in the other Gospels. John is dealing with something far more, well, I don't know if I should say important or not, but he's going to be dealing with the message of Jesus, opening his heart to the disciples, giving them a new commandment, giving them the details of the next 4 chapters. Gary, chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16 deal with Jesus teaching to these disciples on that night. There is no other place in all the Bible where we hear Jesus talk so much. Isn't that amazing?
True. Yes, if you have a red letter edition, it's all red. That's
yes.
what you'll notice about those 4 chapters.
Yeah, indeed. It's incredible. So in order to do that, we have to fill in a little bit about the liturgy of the Passover, because you see, John actually deals with the ritual of the Passover table throughout his entire gospel. We could call his gospel the Passover gospel. And so he does not give us the details here at this particular Passover setting, because his whole book gives us the details of the Passover setting. And we'll tell you all about that when we come back in just a moment, so don't go away. On today's Prophecy in the News, we're discussing John chapter 13. In order to fully understand this chapter, we need to go through some of the Passover Seder, the ritual, the liturgy of the Passover table. Gary, let's look at some of that.
Okay, and by the way, J.R. has written a very extensive, detailed article on this, and we can't possibly give you all the details. You have to read those in Prophecy in the News. But he quotes from Michael Strassfeld, The Jewish Holidays, a Guide and Commentary, and J.R., this is the way we should start. And Strassfeld says, Pesach, Passover, places all the redemptions, past and future, into the same mold. Creation, Exodus, return from exiles past, and the Messianic age. In other words, Passover covers the whole span of Jewish existence. The enslavement of the past, the Messianic hope of the future, all tied into this festival.
And it's all wrapped around the Passover lamb dying for the sins of the world, isn't it?
Yes.
So the night before Passover, or that is the day before Passover, in the evening, they take a spoon and a candle and a feather, and they clean the house. They clean out all the chametz. I don't know if they sprinkle a little around so they'll know where to go to get it, but it's a thorough house cleaning. Talk about spring cleaning. They prepared for Passover. Well, when Jesus sent Peter and John, they followed a man with a pitcher on his head. When he turned into a house, they inquired of the good men of the house, or the master of the house, about securing the upper room, a large upper room for the Last Supper. They got there, they found that the room had already been prepared explicitly for them and for Jesus. So somehow, some way, they knew that Jesus was coming. And so it was a simple thing to get that room ready. Well, Gary, we see this in the Passover Gospel in chapter 1. We see Jesus as the Passover lamb, and secondly, he cleanses the temple. This is what is done in preparing for the Passover.
The purging of the leaven.
Yes.
And when he cleans the temple and then points to himself as its fulfillment.
And then, of course, we come to the evening of the full moon, when all the participants gather around the Passover table. Now, Alfred Edersheim explained that the table's only about a foot off the floor, and they recline in order to eat the Passover. That is, they lay down with their feet out behind the table. They lay down on pillows, and their left arm rests on the table, and their head then also in their left hand, and leaving their right hand free to observe at leisure in these things. And you've got to understand that the first Passover was eaten while the people were standing. That was in Egypt under Moses. But after that, the ritual was changed so that they lay down in a form of leisure. This is a very important part of the observation of Passover. You don't sit at the table with chairs like a modern table. And of course, when Jesus went around, and washed their feet, all he had to do was go around the perimeter of the table. Their feet were sticking out behind. It was easy enough to get to them. So we have this ritual begins then as they recline at the table, and then they pour the first cup. The first cup is called sanctification. They dilute it with water, about half and half. And we can see this miracle of the turning the water into wine as a ritual that alludes to this particular part of the Passover Seder. And also when Jesus talked in John 3 about to Nicodemus about being born of the water and of the Spirit, I think he was also referring to this diluting of the water, or of the wine with water. And so they observed this Kaddish, The word means to sanctify. It also means to sanctify yourself. And so the participants sanctify the meal. This is the first cup, the cup of sanctification. Gary, tell us about the second cup.
Well, J.R., after drinking the first cup, there is a washing of hands and then a pouring of the second cup, which is called the cup of thanksgiving. And then the host asks questions of the participants. Why is this night different from all other nights? Now, traditionally, there are 4 questions asked, and we don't have time to cover all of those.
Yeah.
But the questions lead to the 4 types of people represented in the Passover liturgy. There are 4 types of people: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the innocent. And those are used to illustrate the redemption.
Yes. Now, it's interesting to me that there were 4 types of people there that night. I see Judas Iscariot as the wicked. I see John, who was the youngest of the group, as the innocent. He's the one, you know, who rolled over and leaned up against the ear of Jesus and said, "Who is it, Lord?
Yes.
Who's going to betray you?" Now, as far as the other 2 groups, the innocent and the ignorant, I don't know exactly. I guess it's your choice. You take a pick who you want. But we do have 4 questions there in the next few chapters. Peter asked, "Lord, whither goest thou?" Thomas asked in chapter 14 and verse 5, "How can we know the way?" Philip gives a query that requires a response. "Lord, show us the Father." That's in 14:8. And then Judas, not Iscariot, asked, "Lord, how is it that thou wilt manifest thyself unto us and not unto the world?" Now, these 4 questions demonstrate the 4 questions at the Passover table. You could, if you go down to a synagogue, to their bookstore, and buy a book on the ritual of the Passover, they will give you these 4 questions. And so we have 4 questions right here. Isn't that incredible?
It is incredible that in fact, you find that the Gospel of John, and by the way, we've said this for many years, that the Gospel of John is based on Passover. I think, were the first to really suggest that years ago, and over the years we have refined our position. Still in the process of doing so to this day.
Now,
J.R., let me just mention that there is the pouring of the first cup, the washing of hands. There is the breaking of this bread called the Afikomen.
Yes, we need to discuss that.
And we need to discuss that because early in the Passover, this bread is broken. A part of the bread is placed back at the host's position. The other one is hidden.
Yes.
And not recovered until the end of the meal, at which time it is brought out and broken up in small pieces, distributed as the very last morsel to be taken at the meal. So nothing else is taken after that morsel. It's called the Afikomen, which is Greek for "I come."
And it's taken with the third cup, the cup of redemption. That is what Jesus instituted as an ordinance for us to remember him until he comes. It meaning "I comes" points to the second coming of Christ, doesn't it?
But after that second cup is consumed, and long before the third cup and the recovering of the Afikomen, there's something very interesting. There is a second washing of hands.
Yes.
Everyone washes hands in conjunction with taking what's called the sop in the New Testament.
Yes. Now Jesus takes this washing of the hands to a deeper level. He washes their feet.
Yes.
There are a number of reasons why he does this. This is a part of his commandment, telling them that if they want to really be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, then they should demonstrate it by becoming a servant. There is no greater privilege than to serve others. And this was the crux of his message here that night. To those arrogant men who were bickering with each other, who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, Jesus wanted them to know that that they should be willing to wash each other's feet. So this is very symbolic here, I think, of the humility that we need and the love. You know, Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another." Oh, Christian today, have we forgotten that? That is the main teaching by which the world knows that we're Christians.
And J.R., it has been wisely said that the God of heaven washed the feet of ordinary men. And this is the most beautiful picture of sanctification probably in the whole Bible, because sanctification is the ongoing cleansing done on a daily basis by the Spirit of God in the life of the believer. And here Jesus establishes this idea of foot washing. You get your feet dirty in daily traffic, and He's faithful to wash your feet.
Yeah. So we have the Gospel of John, chapter by chapter, following this liturgy. The cleaning of the house, that is, the Lamb prepared, Jesus, John chapter 1. The cleaning of the house, cleansing of the temple, chapter 2. And we have the Afikomen in chapter 6. It's an incredible study. And we'll continue it on our next program. We'll be back in just a moment.